Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant, and today I want to talk to you about EVE Valkyrie, which I recently got hands-on experience at the EGX show in London. Now I want to preface this with saying yes, I do realise this is a pre-alpha build, and that no doubt weighs very heavily on where the game currently stands, but I did come away from the booth with far less enthusiasm than I went in with. Now there's a number of reasons for that, and the first being that Oculus Rift themselves seem to be intended to make this game a showcase for VR, and at the moment it's got a lot to prove for itself, so naturally expectations are high for the game. So what is the game like? Well, I can tell you it's actually very different to the impression that the announcement trailer gives the game, and it's also quite different to the impression that we got from the E3 demo. No doubt a lot of that is due to the fact that the game has just been ported over to the Unreal 4 engine, which means a lot of the work that CCP had done on the game has had to be scrapped, meaning that we are obviously in very early stages of this game. So keep that in mind when I say what I've got to say, but also keep in mind that I can only judge what I've seen. So, what did I see? Well, we can break it down into a number of areas. We can talk about combat, we can talk about graphics, and we can talk about the VR experience itself. So starting with combat, the trailers that have been shown so far give the sense that the game is a very immediate experience, that you're very much in the centre of combat and very much on top of the ships. But the fact is that in most cases you're essentially chasing a target reticule. The enemy ship is usually far smaller than the reticule, so you don't really get to see that ship until it passes by you or passes over you, and that's okay to an extent. That's pretty much what we've come to expect from a lot of space games. But what it does mean is that whilst your ship does fly along at a very high velocity, there isn't really a sense of immediacy to the combat. However, the flight model itself is actually very good and isn't too dissimilar to what we'd seen in Free Space 2, and although that is a very old game now, it still is a high compliment towards Valkyrie to compare it to such a game, which in my opinion is one of the best combat games or space combat games out there. In terms of graphics, it really is very noticeable at this point that the game has only just been switched over to the Unreal 4 engine. It doesn't have any zap or wow factor. We got a lot of low textures and low polygon count. There's just no wow factor there at all. But I'm sure that will come with time and with work. That's really mainly a case of polishing things. But we also have to keep in mind that at the moment it appears that VR is very much a resource hog in terms of hardware requirements, and we don't know how the PlayStation 4 itself is going to be able to handle that sort of thing just yet. We do know that PCs need a high-powered card in order to handle VR, especially at 1080p with all the high effects on, and it's possible that the PlayStation may not be up to doing that and may indeed need to run at a lower spec in order to maintain the all-important frame rate. The DK2 does need to maintain 75 frames a second in order to maintain its latency and sense of presence. We're not sure yet what the consumer version of the Oculus Rift is going to need, but the current leading theories are that it's going to be around 90 frames a second. So considering that the consoles at the moment struggle to push 60 frames a second on a lot of games, and considering that VR itself is very intensive, it may be unlikely that we can expect a game to run at 1080p with high graphical fidelity while still maintaining 60 frames a second. So again, I'm sure that the graphical fidelity and the all-important wow factor will come in time, but as of right now it's not there just yet. Now, in terms of VR itself, the most important factor, aside from the technical aspects like graphical resolutions and frame rate, always, for me, comes down to the sense of scale. It's no good being in a room when the chairs are head height and the table is knee height. You need to be in a room that is scaled to the size of a human. And that goes for the same for any game in any environment. If you're in a racing game and you're sitting inside the car, you need the steering wheel to feel the same size as a real steering wheel. It's no good at all if that steering wheel feels like the size of a CD. And the car itself needs to feel to scale, so you get that sense of being sat inside the car. So, how does Valkyrie handle this? Well, the good news is that when you're sat inside the cockpit, it really and truly does feel like you're sat inside a cockpit. It seems that CCP really do understand this, and they've gone the extra mile to make sure that everything feels to scale. And they've done a wonderful job. When you first put on the VR headset and you're sitting there in the launch bay, it literally feels like you're sat inside the ship. And a lot of people have compared this game to the Battlestar Galactica that came out in the 2000s, sitting in a Viper, and yes, I think it really does feel like that, at least how I'd imagine it to feel. However, unfortunately, where Valkyrie falls down is in regards to the sense of scale when you're in space. Now, there are not many objects in space in order to convey that sense of scale to you, and this places a high degree of importance to convey scale on the few objects that are there. Now, one object in particular that is there is an Apocalypse battleship. Now, for those of you that haven't played EVE Online, these are truly massive ships, and for those of you that have played EVE Online, you will know they're among the bigger ships in the game. Now, there's one of these in the battlefield in the EVE Valkyrie demo, and unfortunately they really do not feel particularly large at all. So hopefully these ships are there as placeholder objects at the moment, and I'd highly recommend to CCP that they dramatically increase the scale of these battleships. They need to feel huge if you want to convey the epic scale of space and the environment. Now, this may sound like I'm beating up on Valkyrie, but please don't think that. It's far from a case of that. And I was actually impressed with what the game had to show, but to be perfectly blunt with you, it wasn't that much more advanced than I've seen from some of the Oculus Rift demos that have been put out there by lone indie developers. Now, given time and the huge resources CCP no doubt have, along with a decent budget, I'm sure that Valkyrie can be a flagship VR product. But CCP are going to need to address the issues that can make or break the VR experience. The positive side is that CCP have, in all their interviews, shown a very keen awareness of what can indeed make or break the VR experience. So I, for one, am of the opinion that Valkyrie is very much on the right path, but I also want to express here today that at the moment it has a very, very long way to go, and judging by the very early state of the game, it's going to be a long time before we actually see anything that resembles a high octane, intense combat experience. So there you have it, my thoughts on EVE Valkyrie as it stands at the moment. I'd very much like to come back and have a look at this again soon. For now, I hope you've enjoyed. This has been Obsidian Ant, signing off.